Welcome, everyone. My name is Nur Bimani. I'm the director of the London School of Economics South Asia Centre. Today, we're running a webinar on digitalization and financial inclusion in India. We have three outstanding speakers who are going to discuss a number of issues. If we look at this idea of digitalization, there is almost no place on the planet that is not affected to some degree by at least some mobilization of digitalization activities. Most countries will see this as being tied to economic growth. The inclusion of individuals is absolutely essential to that growth. People have to be able to access web-based devices and web-based platforms in order to engage in that sort of productivity. Of course, we've seen very many examples of positive outcomes that stem from organizations, from countries that digitalize, from e-education to e-health, to e-governance, to simply being exposed to other ideas, perhaps interacting with individuals that you might not otherwise be able to. So there is a real positive side to the idea of digitalization, and I think Digital India is one of the key parts of the planet that is really galvanizing what could be productive as an outcome of digitalization efforts. But by the same token, I think there's probably a number of challenges that we have to look at, perhaps even a dark side to digitalization. One might suggest that it is linked to a degree of perhaps corruption. We find that some people are left out of the equation that digitalization can deliver in terms of economic growth. Of course, we have all sorts of issues, perhaps misinformation, disinformation. We have social media activities that, perhaps bring about a level of inequities. And so there's a whole panoply of outcomes that may emerge from digitalization. But inevitably, I think that technological progress is going to change society, and society will have to come to grips with the extent to which digitalization and other ICT technologies are starting to reshape the world. So these are some of the issues that we're going to be discussing. Just by way of note, for those of you who've attended our webinars before, you will know we are on YouTube. This is a Zoom-based link. You're very welcome to pose questions through the chat function. We will not identify you if you do pose a question. You can address your questions to all speakers or specific speakers if you wish to. If you'd like to tweet, then please tag us on at SAsia LSE. Very welcome to do that. The speakers also have tags, so you can use those as well. So what I'll do now is to introduce our speakers. They will each speak for 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then we'll engage in the conversation. I'll put a few questions to them, and then we can have the audience also partake in sort of asking questions. So I will start with an introduction. Jayshree Bajoria, she's an Associate Director, Human Rights Watch. She's part of the Asia division. She's conducted research and published reports on a broad range of issues, including sexual violence, discrimination based on caste and religion, policy reform, violence, harassment at work, freedom of expression, assembly, digital rights in South Asia. She is, I guess, a real advocate of change that may be brought about through a variety of different means, and digitization and digital platform is no exception for her. She has worked in the past as deputy editor at CFR.org. This is the website of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. She did win a News and Documentary Emmy and 2 Overseas Press Club Awards for her writings. She is a graduate of Columbia University, having earned a master's degree there. I should say that Columbia University and the LSE have a number of engagements which are all fruitful and positive. Our second guest is Mahmudul Hasan Laskar. He is assistant professor in the Department of Sociology, University of Science and Technology, Meghalaya in India. He is a founding executive committee member for the Research Committee on Digital Sociology. And he's also a member of the Indian Sociological Society, as well as being a member of the Sociology on Local Global Relations. This is a working group of the International Sociological Association. His research spans a number of areas, including digital sociology, social stratification, environmental sociology, and social well-being. So welcome, Hasan. And our third speaker is Aditya Singh, and he is a professor and director of the Athena School of Management in Mumbai. He also teaches there leadership and differential thinking, which I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit about. He has over 2 decades of experience across the corporate sector, consulting, entrepreneurship. He's a mentor to a number of startups. And then he speaks very extensively, and I've sort of watched him speak on issues to do with globalization, academia, sustainability, leadership, and all the good things in life, including, of course, digital transformation. So welcome to the three of you. So what we'll do, as I mentioned, is that we will have a few minutes, each one of you, addressing the broad issues that concern you, specifically relating to this area, and then we'll open up to questions. So we'll start perhaps with Hasan, and then we'll have Jayshree, and then Aditya speak. So Hasan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, particularly Professor Alnur, Professor Sarkar, and South Asia Center, London School of Economics for inviting me. I am very delighted to be the part of this panel discussion in the digitalization and financial inclusion in India. So, very briefly, I would like to focus on three important highlights of this discussion. Emergence of digital society, digital divide, and digital inclusion. So, digitalization, as we know, globally transforming and changing the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, technological infrastructure, social infrastructure, and the economy itself. And the if we take the reference of Manuel Castells, the Information Society and Network Society, and to add into this, we can say that today's global society has come into a stage, what we can say as a digital society. It is just an extension of network society or information society or knowledge society. And this digital society is not an alternative of the physical society. What I'm calling is physical society that I have mentioned and elaborately discussed in my paper, which is published in the Frontier. So it is a kind of parallel society, digital society, the kind of parallel society to the physical society. And digital society is mainly characterized by digital social institutions such as digital family, digital parenting, digital economy, digital capital, digital surveillance, digital power relations, and so on. So, in this way, a digital society has emerged, and that digital society is making challenges in the life of the peoples of the members of society in different parts of the world. So, one such issue is digital divide. So, here I would like to say that this digital divide is rooted in the prevailing or existing socio-economic divide in the society. Digital divide cannot be understood in isolation. It has to be understood in relation to the existing or prevailing socioeconomic divide in society. If we take the reference of India, so there is existing socioeconomic divide, maybe in the form of caste, in the form of class, in the form of agrarian divisions and disparity, in the form of ethnicity, and so on. So, this prevailing or existing socioeconomic divide is the basis or root of the digital divide that is there, that has emerged in India, particularly in the context I am trying to understand. And then to further elaborate this issue of digital divide, we can see there is mainly various dimensions of digital divide. One particular dimension is the rural-urban digital divide. And this, again, digital divide exists in three areas particularly. in the digital infrastructure, digital access, and digital usage or consumption that I would like to elaborate this particular issue. So in these three areas, there exists a digital divide. And this digital divide is in the level of rural and urban. Again, if we go further detail into these two geographical places or areas, we can again find there is a digital divide between weaker sections and affluent sections. These two sections, that is affluent and weaker sections, may be there in the rural areas as well as in the urban areas. So urban areas naturally may be considered as digitally empowered or digitally included, but there is again weaker sections, maybe the slum dwellers and some urban poors who are digitally excluded or digitally poor, or they are less accessed into the digital infrastructure and digital resources. So this is the overall issue of the digital divide. Again, very specific to this particular issue, I would like to focus on the digital usage versus digital consumption. There is an issue of growing consumption of digital platforms, particularly the social media. That I have also doing a research on the consumption trend of social media. That how consumption trend of social media is increasing in India, and that consumption trend and the digital usage or constructive digital usage, there may be contradiction, there will be dialectic. So that can be an issue. Of course, I'm not able to give very elaborate points in this particular time slot. So this is the issue, that is how we can see the digital usage and digital consumption, whether it is just a mere consumption or digital usage. So then digital divide has given rise to the issue of digital inclusion, that is, which is very important. Just like socio-economic divide needs to be bridged through social inclusion, so there is a need of digital inclusion to bridge the digital divide. So this digital inclusion, again, I would say, is very much linked to the digital literacy. Digital literacy, which again covers various aspects like digital economy, as our topic suggests, like the financial aspects, digital economy, then digital governance, digital educations, parents' digital awareness and digital education in parenting the children or socialization. Today's socialization or parenting is not just the parenting and looking after the children. So even if they're very educated, but if they are not the digitally aware, digitally educated, so it becomes a difficult for the parents and even eventually just the children to get into the real digital landscape. So this digital literacy is one of the important issue which is linked to the digital inclusion. So very inevitably linked. Again, this digital literacy, further linked to the digital consumptions. There may be digital knowing that is availability or information of the usage of particular device and the digital literacy. That is, here I would take the reference of digital native and digital immigrants. Like digital natives are those who are born into this digital era, who are socialized with the digital technologies and devices. They may know the usage as well as they may use it for constructive purpose. But for digital immigrants, like those who are born before digitalizations, for them, they are relearning or re-socializing into it. So this digital literacy and the digital inclusion, again, may look, it should look into the two aspects, like digital natives and digital immigrants. Digital immigrants are vulnerable in one particular aspect, but digital natives are vulnerable in another particular aspect. Digital natives are very much vulnerable, particularly in the excessive usage, over usage, or sometimes uncontrolled usage and consumptions. Digital immigrants, those who are older generations, they may be finding it difficult to use the digital technologies, digital infrastructure, digital platforms for different constructive purposes. So these are the various challenges of digital inclusion. So my point here is that financial inclusion in sociological point of view is one dimension of the overall digital economy or digital capitalism at global context. So if we try to understand the financial inclusion in India or in a developing countries in the context of digital economy and digital capitalism, it would be a more inclusive and more effective. So this is my uh, initial remark on this particular issue.
Thank you, Hasan. Fascinating points you've made, and we're going to explore some of these in a few moments. So we'll turn now to Jayshree, and perhaps you can give a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Al-Noor, and thank you, the London School of Economics, South Asia Centre, for having me. Welcome to all the viewers who have tuned in from around the world, but particularly those in India and Asia, because we know this is kind of late for most of you. As you know, today, India has one of the fastest growing digital economies in the world, and India is seen as a leader in the global digital economy. Since the launch of the Digital India mission in 2015, internet has really become fundamental, increasingly to every aspect of daily life of Indians, be it access to banking, healthcare, education, commercial activities, and even access to government services. One such big transformation we see is in the development of unified payments interface. So the government of India has promoted this idea of financial inclusion and increased productivity through the use of digital public infrastructure, and the unified payments interface, or UPI, is one such initiative that we see. So, which basically means that it allows people to use their smartphones to make instant, real-time digital payments. So in India today, from the local grocer to the street vendor, everybody uses cashless digital payments. But at the same time, this digital transformation has also led to exclusion and has led to some harm. Due to a variety of factors. One such factor that Hasan was talking about was digital divide. There is poor or lack of network coverage in many parts of the country, but also due to certain government policies and actions, such as internet shutdowns or repressive laws and policies, online regulation laws and policies that have led to censorship, or even concerns over data protection and privacy. So for instance, over the last 5 years, every year, India has shut down the internet more than any other country in the world. This has affected millions of lives and access to livelihoods for people. This has also led to economic consequences. So, for instance, Top 10 VPN, a company that monitors internet outages across the world, just this month came out with its report saying that last year there were 30 major internet shutdowns in India, which came at a cost of $585 million and affected 59 million people. These internet shutdowns also violate India's own domestic and international legal principles. For instance, India's Supreme Court requires that internet shutdowns should be necessary, proportionate, should be a measure of last resort, after other, sort of solutions have already been explored, and should be lawful. But in reality, what we often find that this has become such a routine police procedure and such a default police action that we see internet shutdowns to prevent cheating in examinations, or to prevent peaceful protests or criticism of government policies. They also harm the government's Digital India initiative, particularly because, the Digital India has made access to internet mandatory to access all government social protection measures. So be it, access to free and subsidized food rations under the public food distribution system, or it be, the income guarantee scheme under the Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Act, or MG Narega as it is often called, or the e-governance in rural villages. So millions of Indians from socially and economically marginalized communities are particularly at risk where they lose access to these food rations or to vital livelihoods that they are guaranteed when the internet is shut down. For example, Narega provides income security to 100 million rural households. But now the government has moved to digitize every aspect of Narega. So for job creation to attendance checks at the job sites to wage payments, each aspect of this job requires adequate internet access. For instance, when I was in Rajasthan at some of these Narega job sites, now what Narega requires is from the job site, twice a day, a geotagged photo has to be uploaded online to show that you showed up at the job site. And at some of these job sites, which were in quite remote areas, my phone did not have internet. My smartphone did not have access to internet. So network coverage is already quite a big problem, which is why we also saw massive protests by Narega workers for months in Delhi and in other places against the digitization of this app, because it was really affecting their livelihoods. But internet shutdowns only makes it even worse for them to access it. Similarly, now the food ration shops, where you access subsidized or free food rations entitled to you under the government program, requires Aadhaar authentication. Now, what it is really, it is a small machine which uses the SIM card, which is very similar to what you use in a mobile phone. So a 2G SIM card, for example, is what is required to authenticate your thumbprint for Aadhaar, and then you get the food rations that you're entitled to this month. And it's usually the mobile internet that is cut off when the internet shutdown happens in India, because you have to understand, in India, still 96% of internet subscribers actually use mobile internet access. Fixed line internet access is still very, very, it's like 4% of internet subscribers have access to that, who can afford it or have access, which means when we talk about mobile internet access being snapped off, we are actually talking about basically almost an internet blackout, because there are very few who can afford otherwise. And in rural areas, honestly, it is mostly only mobile internet access. So we see that these technological solutions, Digital in India is an ambitious, it is an important initiative. The aim was to, plug leakages, to reduce corruption, to increase administrative efficiency. But in reality, some of these technological solutions, when we see the implementation, we find that the implementation is quite different from what the objective may be, and can lead to harm and excluding the very people that it is aiming to benefit. So there is quite a lot more work that is required if you're ensuring real inclusion by ensuring that everything is digitized. All government delivery of food and services or access to goods and services is digitized. So that's one big part of that story. The other challenge is also that a lot of this digital public infrastructure was developed in the absence of privacy laws and data protection laws in India. And over the last decade, there have been multiple and repeated reports of massive data breaches, of leaks of sensitive personal information, including banking information of people, for also use of personal data by government and private companies without consent and accountability. So, for example, Diksha, an education app that was controlled and used by the central government, there were reports that it transmitted data, children's data, to third-party companies using advertising trackers. And also it had the ability to locate precise location data of children, which was not something that was disclosed in the privacy policy. Uh, However, despite these revelations, despite these data breaches, India adopted a data protection law last year in August that not only will not prevent such violations in the future, but it also exempts the government from compliance in the name of national security from this, which only leads to more concern that it might lead to more sort of unchecked state surveillance. Online regulation policies such as information technology rules, there has been quite a lot of there's been a lot of writing and research into how these laws undermine encryption, undermine media freedoms, will lead to greater government control over online content. While regulation is important, we do know that there is the misinformation, disinformation is massive. But the way these laws, the way these rules are written, right now, they do not actually adhere to international legal principles. So finally, I would say for India, for a really inclusive and sustainable digital future, everyone's rights will need to be protected. This will require a lessening of the digital divide. This will require greater digital literacy, better network coverage, but it will also require amendment of some of these laws and regulations, and and India will have to ensure that digital governance does not come at a cost of people's privacy and people's data. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jayshree. Just a real sort of interesting set of challenges that you've laid out. In a sense, one senses a little bit of positivity in your tone about the broad direction, but then it comes down to the details of implementation. Are we actually achieving those objectives, or have those objectives changed? So, hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss some of these points. So I'll turn now to Aditya, our third speaker this evening, and over to you if you'd like to elaborate on some of the points that you've made sort of on other platforms as well. Thanks, Aditya.
Thank you, Alnur. It's good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending which part of the universe you're right now in. It's a nice almost 9 p.m. over here in India, in Mumbai or Bombay, whatever we prefer. Thank you to the team at the South Asia Center, the London School of Economics, Alnur and Alajan, for having me over here with you. Thank you also for being able to share this platform with such great speakers. And that's one of the things I'm always scared of when you have two such great panelists before you. They pretty much covered half the story that you're going to cover. So you always are starting on a sticky wicket, but I'll try my best over here. India has achieved a seminal achievement a few months ago. We became the world's most populous country. I mean, you can begrudge us for a lot of things, but when it comes to making babies, we are the best in the world, right? And we've become the most populated country. We've crossed China in that. And we are, depending on the census, on population counts, anything between 1.4 to 1.5 billion is what our population is supposed to be. Now, the interesting thing is, India today has 1.10 billion mobile phone connections. That's a lot. If I take it from a percentage perspective, 80% of India's population today has a mobile phone. Now, of course, you can look at standard deviations. Some people may have 2 connections, some may have none. But let's take it at an average as we see it. 700 million Indians today are internet users. That is more than 50% of India's population. 36% of India's population had a smartphone in 2018. By 2023, that number has crossed 75%, which is astronomical. That's a doubling of the numbers in 5 years. I'm sure COVID had some role to play in that, but we'll come to that a bit later. Interestingly, while you have 700 million internet users, 467 million of them also are social media users. And that just tells you, both in absolute terms and in relative terms, but if I look at proportionality, both from an Indian perspective and from overall global perspective, the sheer power of digitalization which has happened in the past decade or so. Now let's take a step back, because context is everything, right? Where did this come from? This has come a lot from the ICT, or at least the mobile telephone revolution, which we had in India starting about 2 decades back. The fact of the matter is, and this is something which a lot of sociologists have gone through this, is we jumped that entire phase of the fixed line phase. All right, give me a second, excuse me. Apologies, I have Alexa scheduled for a 9 p.m. broadcast, and she is always prompt, so apologize for that. All right. Okay, getting back into the technology, right? Okay. So this is a situation which we have. We jumped over that entire fixed line telephony, and we moved completely straight away into the mobile phone thing. The fact of the matter is, today, data and voice, both of them, is the cheapest in India compared to anywhere else in the known world. Now, that may not be too good for the data providers like Vodafone, Airtel, Jio, but it's wonderful for the users. So that created a platform today and where we have phenomenal internet usage. That's one part of this entire story. The other part is that the median age in India today of an Indian citizen is 28 years. Basically, 50% of this country's population, or slightly over that now, is below the age of 30. That is phenomenal. So you're talking about 700 to 750 million Indians below the age of 30, which means most of them, unlike all four of us over here, are either millennials, all right, or in fact, not even, they're Gen Zs, in fact, or Gen Zs, how you pronounce it, or Gen Alphas, right? Now, the Gen Zs are people who've actually gone up using the internet and the computer. But you have this new generation called the Gen Alpha, those who are born post 2012, who have actually grown up with mobile telephony, internet access, who are digitally cognitive. And that is a huge opportunity. Of course, as Hasan said, being digitally literate can also be a challenge, but that's another story, right? So you have this as a context. So that's the digitalization story so far in India. I'll come back to what the government has done, but let's look at it from a financial inclusion perspective. And the way I look at it when you look at financial inclusion, it's got three threads to it: the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. The first is the direct action, as we call it, where you enable people to transact financially through digital mode. So be it digital government payouts, be it using their IDs to actually give the money to their accounts, enabling them to carry out direct transactions. That's one part of it. The second part is the secondary part, which is you enable enterprise, you enable commerce to encourage people to actually have increased wallet shares, increase the standard of living, and actually help in employment. So I'll give you a small example, for example. And I think this is a revolution which has happened everywhere. So in India, you have Zomato or Swiggy, which are home delivery apps, right? It's actually spawned an entire employment sector which was not there before. All right. And it's empowering. Let's go one stage forward. There's something called Zepto and Dunzo in India, which guarantees you that in 10 minutes to 15 minutes, you're going to get groceries delivered at your doorstep, micro retail. Now, I don't, of course, I'm worried about the safety of those riders who drive at the speed of light. But imagine the kind of employment you've given to an entire sector which is not there. So you are actually financially empowering people who didn't have that. Al-Noor, an example of this, of course, in the rural sector would be ITC's e-Chopal, which was a pioneer 2 decades ago. Where actually they were satellite phone that time enabled centers where farmers got updated information about trade, about seeds, about costs. You actually bifurcate, you bypass the entire middleman by a huge number and amounts, and that's actually empowered millions of farmers in India. And of course, you have the tertiary part of empowerment, which actually has a direct impact, again, on the financial inclusion, which is when you use technology for things like ed-tech, for health tech. Today, you're using technology to educate Indians at a scale never seen before. And you're not only training to educate them, you're actually skilling them up. Because I think skills is something which has been a bane when it comes to Indian education for a long time. Similarly, you have health tech coming up. These are all going to impact you from a financial perspective sooner or later. So you have primary, secondary, and tertiary, and that's what this entire ecosystem is creating. Now let's take a step back. So that's great. Now what has happened in India? So what I think the greatest thing that just happened is the government, from a digital governance perspective, has taken policy decisions to actually support this. And we've seen the evolution of the digital public infrastructure, the DPI. Now, this again sits on 3 different legs. The first one, of course, has been the digital ID revolution, the Aadhaar revolution, which started way back in 2009. Now, again, today, 1.3 billion Indians have an Aadhaar ID. And for those of us who know South Asia, which is all of us over here, getting 1.3 billion people getting onto a digital platform is no mean task. And that's phenomenal, all right? And what has it done? A simple matrix. Since the Aadhaar thing came out in 2009, more than 416 million low-cost bank accounts have been created. And we're talking about inclusion. The clincher is 56% of those are opened by women. So that's diversity for you. The second part of this, of course, is the Unified Payment Initiative, right? The UPI, which has been something you should be very proud of in India, right? Which is, I think, again, a stack which we started in 2016, and it's evolved to become this self-enabling, initiative. You have 300 million consumers today on the stack. You also have 500 million merchants on the stack at the same time. It's so successful that today 40% of all transactions in India are digital. Imagine this is a country where, in South Asia, again, cash was king. Now today, 40% of our transactions are digital. We are processing 11 billion, not million, 11 billion transactions every single month. That's a huge amount of transactions happening. And the third leg of this is what we call the DigiLocker initiative, which is essentially a digital wallet where you've seen all our documentation, which can be stored digitally, all right, and accessed wherever you are. So what that means is today when I walk into an airport, I actually don't have to do, I just have to show my DigiLocker and I can walk in. Now, of course, there are pros and cons, etc. But just look at the way it's revolutionized a country which is still classified by many as a developing nation or a less developed country, if you talk in economic terms. So where's this come from? It's come from government policy, once. It's also come from a very large amount of private sector initiative, no doubt about it, at every single stage. And it's critical for this to succeed. And the third, of course, is what we call jugaad in South Asia, which is frugal innovation, right? They say necessity is the mother of invention, and it's really here for us to see. And you've seen this innovation, which has actually created an entire ecosystem for us. And that's what's going to be actually taking us forward. Having said that, let us be very honest, there are challenges. How do you scale this up further? Getting the first 300 million consumers on UPI was the easy part. How do you get the next 300 million on board? That's going to be the difficult part. All right. You've got 1.1 billion penetration already in the mobile phones. How do you get more happening? How do you reach the last person, the last minute delivery at the bottom of the pyramid? That's going to be a challenge. Okay? And what will it take by way of government policy and government implementation to do that? Are there easy answers to that? There are none. There can never be. But if you ask me, we've actually traversed a lot of that path already. There are challenges, but I think every great initiative has a challenge. The fact that you have a first world country like Singapore adopting the UPI framework for their digital payments we've got some things correct with us. Now, how do we make it to perfection? Well, that lies in the eyes of the beholder, and hopefully we can get some answers by the end of this conversation.
Thank you, Aditya. That's a very interesting outline, and I think you've laid out for us a huge number of possibilities that were laid out in terms of digital India, and there are kind of so many examples of that being achieved. I did want to then kick off with some of the points that the three of you mentioned, and this relates to really the hurdles that we're facing with attempting to materialize what Digital India had in mind and where we are now. And I think Jayshree kind of very nicely summed it up in terms of there being certain objectives, certain intentions, but then the outcomes are rather different from what was intended initially. So the objectives perhaps are not being met. But, if we look at any major technology that the world has undergone, so today, we might talk about being in the fourth industrial revolution, but I think in a sense, we're looking at computers on every desk, or we were looking at the locomotive, or we were looking at the expansion of cars. All of those took a very long time. And Aditya, you called it kind of, in a sense, the last mile. So, Jayshree, I wanted to then put this explicitly to you to start with. You've laid out a number of issues and challenges, and you even, I think, allude to the dark side of Digital India. Isn't it just a matter of there being a lag? Any new major technology is going to take time to in a sense, benefit the whole of society across the board. Aren't some of the issues that you've identified not simply a manifestation of there being a lag between the rollout of a technology and its sufficient expansion so that it benefits, the society-wide sort of set of individuals that it was intended to? Isn't it just a matter of lag, or is it more than that, do you think?
Thank you, Al-Noor. I think it's a bit more complex than that. I think some of it is, some of these challenges are structural challenges that are being built where if they're not being addressed, they are going to actually end up being far more problematic in the future because you're putting in systems that are problematic. So when I am talking about, for example, rules, regulations, and policies, right? If you are putting in rules and regulations that do not comply with commitments that India has made on global stage to an open, free, reliable, secure internet. Internet shutdowns, for example, a policy, right? That is something that now, state governments have the power, the central governments have the power to just snap to basically a kill switch, right? Now, if Digital India is your mission, where literally the government is pushing to make every good delivery, every service delivery online, is pushing every aspect to become digital of your life. And then you use the kill switch. So, for example, an internet shutdown, in fact, 10 years ago, would not have had similar consequences in people's daily lives as it has today. I agree with Aditya. It has transformed. That's how I started, right? My remarks. It has transformed India. It has become... So, even in rural India, internet has become essential because government services require adequate internet access, right? So using the kill switch when the government is pushing for digitization, it's like a self-goal, isn't it? You are hurting your own initiative here. So that is not something, like you said, that's not a time lag issue. That's a government policy issue, right? Where, you're literally harming your own initiatives. Second, you're putting in laws and policies in the name of, say, trying to curb misinformation or fake news, but literally are, not following principles, domestic legal principles or international legal principles. So these are structural problems you're putting in place. So it's... digitalization here is not the problem, right? Also, and finally, if you look at techno solutions as a silver bullet without consultation on the ground and understanding the reality on the ground. So digitalization should happen, but it should happen in tandem with training, in tandem with putting of infrastructure, in tandem with ensuring that the implementation will not be a problem. So 35 crore workers, that is 50 million workers, were left out of NREGA. That is 247% increase in deletion of job records over the last year. That was something that was recorded in Parliament. Now that is a serious problem, right? And that problem could be avoided if there was better consultation and better implementation. So it's not just it's a question of often using sort of a techno solution as a panacea to sort of alleviate poverty, right? Without putting in place, without consultation, without putting in place everything else that is required to ensure that people actually are helped and benefited. Because eventually, what is the intent of it? The intent is to ensure better efficiency, less corruption, and to bring, like you said, to reach the last mile. But if the contrary is happening, then you need to change something. You need to listen to people. That's where we are at. It doesn't have to be. Thank you.
Sure. No. Thank you for elaborating on that, Jayshree. So just picking up on a very similar point that Hasan you touched on. One of the things that you suggested, I think, and it comes out quite clearly in your studies, is the idea that there have always been socioeconomic inequities, and it is that disbalance that has simply been replicated in a digital world as India advances towards, digitalizing society. So is it a matter of really fixing the digital part of modernity, or is it a matter of really dealing with socioeconomic sort of discrepancies and inequities that pre-existed and that were actually never sufficiently addressed? And so they're simply manifesting and perhaps even becoming more magnified in digital society. Which is it?
Yes, thank you, Arun, for raising this issue. Yes, this is a very important issue that how to focus, whether focusing on socio-economic divide or to focus on the digital divide. So, as I said, the socio-economic divide is the basis of the digital divide. So, for example, to elaborate more, uh, the lack of incapability or lack of ability to use digital education, e-learning, infrastructure, resources, and all that makes a person disadvantaged. So simply digitalization is not making the poor sections or weaker sections digitally included. So simultaneously, there must be the focus on the improvement of the capability of the population, not just the eradication of poverty, but improving the capability of the population. Capability uh, in terms of in terms of their capacity on spending for education, for health, for other other aspects of their lives. Improving the capability will develop their socio-economic conditions, and that will determine their position in the digitalization process or the digital resources or their digital capital. They may be digital empowered if they are more socially uplifted or more capable. So I think both the aspects must reinforce each other. That both the aspects must be focused equally.
Okay,
I
thank you.
hope.
Thank you. So clearly you're identifying the link between, the pre-existence of a digital society and what we're seeing now. And I think Jayshree has identified ways in which, you can almost sort of, if you were a conspiracy theorist, then you might even suggest that, the state is pushing for digitalization because it becomes the instrument of access to economic growth, but that instrument can also be shut down whenever the politics don't align with the desired growth level. And so in a sense, I think, you might be forgiven for thinking as perhaps a Martian or an outsider, is the state not using digitalization to basically discipline individuals into submitting to a political agenda that is part of the main sort of parties? Is there, so this is turning to Jayshree, but then I'll come back to Aditya. Is there perhaps excessive evidence of the politicization of the digital towards aligning individuals' perception of what digitization can do and what forms of economic growth should be aspired to? Is politics getting in the way of the true value that digitalization could represent?
I think some of it, I might say some of it is like, when I was talking about internet shutdowns, when I was saying that it's become a default policing action. So often what happens is also there is this something that becomes normalized. So it's, there probably the first time it happened when the internet was shut down, it was because there was a sense that it can stop, there is a lot of fake rumor, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of misinformation, it can lead to further violence, so maybe that is, we shut down the internet, right? And it may have been one of the many solutions that, say, the police use or employ in a tense situation. But over time, over the last decade, what has actually happened is you have normalized the action of internet shutdown. So literally the largest number of internet shutdowns, for example, after Kashmir, happens in the state of Rajasthan. And so this is not even a political argument whether it's like one government or the other. This was Rajasthan under Congress government, for example, that shut down the internet a lot. And a lot of the times it was shut down, like I said, to prevent cheating in examinations, including cheating in school examinations. The state of Assam, Hasan would know, has shut down internet. The state of West Bengal has shut down internet to prevent cheating in school examinations. So when you give state a certain power without accountability, and without rules in place, without safeguards, then when it normalizes that action, it's like a knee-jerk reaction to show, okay, this is the first thing we do. This is supposed to be the last thing you do. But instead, this becomes the first thing you do anytime you anticipate any sort of unrest. And that actually harms. So it harms, like I said, all your other initiatives. So it's not even, while some of the times when the internet is shut down may be political, maybe because you want to prevent information from coming out, or you want reporting on certain abuses, because internet does hugely hinder human rights reporting, as the Human Rights Council, the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner has said. Like, when I hear of an internet shutdown, the first thing I begin to worry about is human rights, right? That's a direct quote. And that is a huge issue. But what we found in our research by Human Rights Watch and Internet Freedom Foundation, for example, is that the economic social rights of the socially and economically marginalized societies, or those communities, are affected because of Digital India Initiative. So it's really more of a dialogue to say that, while you think that, and there is no evidence to show that internet shutdowns, the aims for which internet shutdown was, that say to prevent violence, that it actually does. So there is no evidence to show that an internet shutdown actually stopped violence from happening, like we saw in Manipur. Longest internet shutdown. It started in May. Finally, in November, that mobile internet access began to be restored in certain districts. But the violence had not stopped despite the internet shutdown. So if the objectives are not being met, there hasn't been, even the government's own report, the Parliamentary Standing Committee report, right, has talked about this, that there is no evidence to show that it is actually doing what it is supposed to do. Similarly, I go back to laws, and there is a greater, and this is not just in India, we see this trend across the world, right? There is growing concerns over online content, about how to regulate misinformation, how to regulate online content, and in a large part of the world, we see that there is a growing tendency to actually allow for greater control of the government over online content, for greater censorship, and this is exactly what we are seeing in India as well. That while, again, some of these concerns may be legitimate, but the solutions that they're putting in place has been proven, in fact, not to help with actually those solutions, because the language itself, but actually has been used, in fact, to target critics, has been used to target journalists, has been used to target human rights organizations. So those are serious concerns, that, the same kind of abuses or policing that we see in the physical world, we are seeing in the digital world as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right. There is that deep connection between the physical and the virtual. In fact, Hasan's written some very nice lines around this. That you can no longer inhabit the physical world without having proper access to the virtual. Your limitations in the analog world are in a sense quite delineated by what is available in the digital world, which of course one would never have anticipated. But I wanted to just pick up on a few points and then put a question to Aditya, and this is that clearly, I mean, you've mentioned that the government may, for good or for not so good reasons, limit information access, and information access is naturally going to shape people's perceptions of the world and even their personality and maybe their political inclinations as well. And Aditya, you've written a little bit around the area that we're moving into a world of in a sense, high context towards wider context. You've suggested that we've now entered a world where it's not just depth of information, but it's breadth of information that we can access, and that is changing people's perceptions of what they should be doing, how they experience the world, what their proclivities may be, and I wanted you to comment a little bit on the kind of sociocultural outcomes that are emerging from wider access of people to internet-based information.
Thanks, Alnur. And I think that's one of the fundamental changes which we are seeing in demography, sociology, and even polity over the past 5 years is this fact that breadth of information, the sheer scale of information is coming into play is phenomenal, right? And what's happened is you've seen a change in the way information is disseminated, the way information is gathered, the way information is absorbed, and importantly, the way that information is processed. So the entire loop which is there has gone for a very interesting toss, if I may use the word completely over here. And what's happened is, and I say this to students when I take classes, until about 20 years ago, the biggest fundamental thing that you learned when you were studying was how to give the right answer. I think therein lies a big fundamental change. I think we are in an age now where you have to know how to ask the right question, because there are enough of answers abounding. But if you don't ask the right question, you're going to get a lot of wrong answers around over there. Now, what's happening is, and this is, something which is happening probably because of what's happening in the digital world also, the iteration of information, the feedback loop itself is becoming shorter and shorter and more frequent. What happens because of that is each of us as an individual, those of us in groupings, and larger society does not take the time to process information for what its true worth may be and what its true implications may be. And what this does is it creates a situation where there's a lack of moderation. I think the biggest problem, and I think 2024 is going to manifest that, unfortunately, is you're seeing from a lot of elections coming up all over the world, and you're seeing the rise of extremism, right? There's always this extremist view. It's either my way or the highway. It's the ultra left or it's the hyper right. Where have all the centrists gone? Where have the voices of moderation gone? But that's a manifestation. And remember, we have to understand politicians and governments are very, very canny. As they say, there's a saying, they give the people what they want. And what people now want, unfortunately, to a large extent, in sociologically speaking, is fast action based on insufficient information created by this oversupply abundance of shallow, superficial information, which may not be actually actionable on a long-term perspective. And that's worrisome. That's troublesome. So perhaps one of the major challenges, and this is something someone, a savant like even Elon Musk and all of them came together, especially when you had this entire trend a few months ago of generative AI coming into play, that you have to put in regulations, you have to put parameters, you have to put in structures. I mean, imagine all of this is happening in a very, very random, unstructured way. You have bots pushing, but it's random, unfortunate. Imagine the way that AI is going, and if AI starts creating this hyper information wave, I would not call it misinformation, hyper information wave, you've got trouble coming along the way. So how is it that you address this is going to be one of the major challenges which we face. And if I may just take a step back, I think the biggest problem with governments today when it comes to digital inclusion is not the lack of accountability. That's not the core problem. It's not the lack of understanding of the actions. It is just the simple lack of knowledge. Because you have to understand from their perspective, it is just an extension of censorship. Now, censorship has something existed from the dawn of ages, right? But what they don't understand is today, when you try to censor stuff via the internet lockdown, you are actually affecting everything else which is run by this instrument, which in India's case is everything. Your bank accounts, your payments, your food delivery, right? And that is because there's a fundamental lack and awareness in the higher governance for a lot of people of the implications of what they're doing. So it's not even there's a lack of accountability, it's just a lack of knowledge and awareness. And that is again an important question. How do you, are we ready? And how do we make sure that we don't put such powerful tools in the hands of people who may not truly understand what they are doing? And that is, I think, a fundamental question which has to be addressed, not now, but I think for the coming decades. And it's going to be something which is going to create a lot of debate here and there. And it's going to be interesting to see where that leads to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This last point that you made is one that can be seen to be extremely contentious, putting power in the hands of people through technology, but they may not understand the consequences of that technology. So where do you sort of establish the limits of freedom to use that technology that could empower or disempower, in a sense, individuals? And these are questions that are growing, I think, in an age of, sort of digital technologies and information access, where it used to be that you couldn't get enough information, and now you have so much that the new skill that needs to be developed is one of attention focus. What is it that you focus on? It used to be said, I think, in the analog world that in life you get your 15 minutes. That makes all the difference. I think today it's sort of 15 seconds, perhaps on X, on Twitter, but then that continuously changes. So there is no longer that depth of understanding that's there, but it becomes a matter of flavor of the day, flavor of the hour, flavor of the minute that can move people in different directions very, very rapidly. And that becomes, I think, a potential platform for dissolving long-established cultural precepts that we may have had. So in any case, I mean, we're changing, and I think time is of the essence, certainly in the digital world. I wanted to change now a little bit the discussion, but then pick up on one or two things that Hasan had said, and this is that you've had the internet for quite a number of years, and India has been a leader in ICT-based technologies for a very long time, since the 1990s, really. But Hasan, you suggest that 2016 was a major turning point, especially for India. And this is with the availability of essentially free internet access in almost any amounts, with sort of geos forays into that sort of space. One of the things that I think has come out of that is that, and this links back to Aditya's suggestion that India is very unique in that you've got the largest population of any country, but then a very large proportion of that population is under the age of 30. Many of those are, in a sense, digital natives. They've never known the analog world. But you, Hasan, you suggest that we see a turning point, and yet there is a very strong linkage with the past. And there seems to be a slight contradiction there, in that if only about sort of 6-7 years ago, we've seen India undergoing a major transition, and we have the growth of a population that is very adept with technologies, how can you have such close links that you suggest we have with the past? Haven't we moved towards a very new era of societal transformation, where we need to rethink governance, we need to rethink policies, we need to rethink sort of government objectives, rather than simply extrapolating from the past?
Yes, thank you, Professor Alnur. This I have discussed in my paper, that how free internet service, particularly with the introduction of uh, Geo network, Reliance Geo network in 2016-17, has remarkably changed the entire scenario of digitalization. And as Aditya has mentioned about the increasing number of digital population, and particularly the Gen Z populations, which is increasing. Like, so this digital population has increased remarkably after the free internet service being introduced. And here I would like to add one more issue that has raised by Jayshree, that is internet shutdown. So I would like to take the example of the internet shutdown that has occurred in 2020 in Assam. Uh, During the protest of CAB, that is Citizenship Amendment Bill, that protest was carried out for related to CAB, and internet shutdown was there nearly a month, 20-25 days. So that internet service shutdown has affected a lot of aspects, particularly the admissions, university, college, school admissions, various aspects, economy, services, everything got affected. So here, issue is that, as she has mentioned about that, maybe in the today's shutdown, internet shutdown is very significant. So the increasing digital population on the one hand and free internet service on the other hand is making society digital very empowered, but is also a source of power for those who are in the like in the chair, or those who are in the center, like center of the power. They can use simply these two aspects: control an entire system, entire infrastructure, entire environment. So for example, to suppress a protest, just to control a protest, just simply shut down the internet. As recently there was a phenomena in the Manipur particularly. So a huge protest, and there are a lot of issues in the Manipur, in the northeastern part of India. So internet shutdown was made, and it created a lot of controversies, debate as well, but it also limited the information within this state or within the system. So point here is that how the digitalization is increasing the digital population and also giving power to the like system, how to control the people, how to control this system or environment. So as we can also take the example of digital activism today, and in alternative to the social protest or social unrest or social revolution, there is the rise of digital activism today. So this digital activism is again using of digital platforms, social media, for all kind of campaigns, all kind of social movements, or the social activism. So of course, this increase of the digital population, digitalization, and the free internet service has remarkably transformed and changing uh, the Indian infrastructure, or Indian the people's or human living or conditions. But at the same time, it's also making challenges of digital privacy, challenges of power relations, challenges of the weaker sections, affluent sections gap, as Jayshree has also mentioned about that how weaker sections are mostly affected by the internet shutdown. And so this is how a particular section's elites may be using it as a mode of power exercise, and a particular sections may be getting alienated, excluded from the process.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, it's very clear that there is inclusion and there is exclusion. The attempt may be to engage in greater inclusion, certainly financial inclusion, but also social and so on. But then clearly some are being excluded. And I wanted to put a question to you, Jayshree, but others, please feel free to sort of step in. And this relates to more specifically gender inequalities and disbalances. Of course, India is one of the countries where in the sort of global gender index, it's not doing extremely well, certainly by any standard. But if we look at digital India, and there are a number of studies which may suggest that we have a very large number of women who are excluded from the digital economy simply because of sort of contextual elements and the situation. One study, I think, suggested that on average, women have 15% less access to a smartphone, a mobile phone. I think the same study suggested that women have about 33% less access to the internet than men. So be it Wi-Fi, be it sort of mobile internet access. Is Digital India, in a sense, magnifying the extent of gender disparities that we've been seeing?
I can go first. So when we talk about digital divide in the country, it is very true, I know, that the gender divide is actually a very significant part. When the gender divide, but also bringing in the rural-urban divide with the gender divide. So it's the and that's actually true of, if we are looking at any issue in India, the intersectionality with gender, caste, class, as well as rural-urban becomes a very, very important lens. You cannot really get a full picture in India without looking, and this goes to something that Hasan was talking about pre-existing socio-economic divides, right? And gender divide is very much a part of that. So digital, I don't know if digital divide magnifies it, but you see that definitely in the digital divide as well, just like you would see it in the physical world, because it also was quite magnified if you think about COVID and if you think about access to education during COVID. So, for almost a year, all schools in India were shut down, and the only access to education was online education. And there, a lot of these divides became hugely magnified. The divide of class, the divide of rural-urban, divide of class, and the divide of the gender divide. So, for example, first, there would be, a lot of government schools did not have access to online learning the way private schools had. If you talk about rural areas, there was absolutely no digital learning almost, right? Even in urban areas, say if it's a lower socioeconomic household, and if they have one smartphone, then the chances were that the son would be using it rather than, or, if it's one, then maybe it is being used for other purposes. The girl child getting the smartphone for online learning, again, it becomes lower. So you see this quite a bit. You see that also there are both aspects, again, in terms of, if we go beyond the digital divide, just the use of technology by women in a country like India. If you look at how it can truly become an aspect of empowerment, safety, and when that is taken away, how that can harm. So in terms of, I go back to internet shutdown, because there were women who told me, for example, in the urban context even, a lot more women, access to a smartphone, access to internet actually allows for greater freedom of movement, greater sense of safety and security to a lot of women who step out of their home either to go to colleges or schools or take public transport, or rely on Google Maps, or rely on, services like Uber or Ola. That all that gave them greater freedom of movement, greater sense of security and safety. You shut down the internet, and it makes them more nervous about stepping out, where they can't be in touch, where they can't use Google Maps, where they can't actually use services like Uber and Ola. Journalists, the Assam protest that Hasan was talking about, I spoke to a journalist who was covering that protest. And a female journalist who told me that, in fact, when you're on the ground and you're covering it, especially when there is anticipation of unrest, in the case of protest, it actually makes you far more nervous if you don't have access to real-time information online to see which areas are safe, where the other journalists are, to be able to keep in touch with them. So the sense of safety and security, and this goes to livelihood, this goes to reporting certain professions. Internet really can lead to, as even most sort of in terms of international human rights, it is now accepted that access to internet is an enabler of fundamental human rights, right? It is an enabler of access to education, access to health, freedom of information, expression, association, all of it. So if we look at that, and then we look at who doesn't have access to internet, and in that I talk about girls and women as well, then again, that really giving them that access can really take us that much forward when it comes to development, empowerment, as well as talking about rights of women and girls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Aditya, you want to jump in?
As it's probably clear by now, I have a slightly different take as compared to Jayshree on this one. And that should always be there, right? So, I mean, the way I look at it is, see, it's not what we have to understand the hardships that gender brings on, in case of the digital divide, is not something which was enabled by technology or by the digital revolution. It's been there for thousands of years. Every single matrix pre-digital in the analog age, if you see literacy, lifespan, economic well-being, women, unfortunately, in India were far behind men, and that's a tragedy. There's no two ways about it. Now, what one needs to see is what's happened post this digital revolution, and I want to take it from a inclusion, the financial inclusion aspect that we wanted to look at. Two things. Technology has been a great enabler for a lot of women to become financially, if not completely independent, but self-reliant to some way. I'll give you two examples. I think that's very important for context. In the urban space, for example, today, a lot of women are there, especially, from a weaker economic background, even, from a socio-religious background, who have skills, for example, beauticians, all right, hair done, makeups, seamstresses, who could never go out because they could not go out in the open market and sell their skills and show what they could do. Now you have technological platforms, all right, which enable them to directly get in touch with customers and vice versa. And today, if you go to any high rise in India, in Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, even the smaller cities, you will see a lot of the beauticians who come, in branded clothes, come in a company branded clothes, come do the entire treatment for the lady of the house over there and go off. You are enabling these women to make their own livelihoods and earn their own income. They may not be completely self-reliant because that's a social issue. But from an economic perspective, from a financial perspective, you're empowering them. I think that's phenomenal. That was not that 20 years ago. No way about it. The second part, of course, of that is the rural part of India. Now, we have something called self-help groups, which I'm sure a lot of us know about, what the microfinance institutions were doing, the MFIs. I want to tell you a real case what happens. We talk about giving credit to people. A lot of these women in rural areas want to be independent. That's, again, the power of the internet. They're seeing how women all over the world can be independent. The problem is when they go to a bank for a loan or a credit, they cannot get one. Why can't they get one? It's not because they have a bad credit score, it's because they have no credit score, because they've never taken a loan before. Now, very interesting startups and technology companies are coming, which are saying, okay, we are going to use blockchain, all right? We're going to create financial tokens for these women, all right? These financial tokens are then used to enable non-banking finance corporations to give small loans to these ladies. Now, what is the scale I'm talking about loans over here? 25 to 50,000 rupees. Which is basically what, about 250 pounds to about, not even 200, yeah, about 250 to 500 pounds. I mean, which is nothing. I mean, today, if you go to London, I mean, that's what you may spend in Mayfair in a restaurant for dinner, all right? But that is what changes their future, because with that money, these ladies are investing it in, small things, basket weaving, for example. And again, that same technology uses them to get pre-approved customers, no middleman. So they get money straight into their account again, all right? Imagine the positive, virtuous cycle that you have been able to create in rural India also. Now, is there many a slip between the cup and the lip? Of course there is. And that's going to happen in everything. But I can tell you today, I am one of those people, and I'm a part of a lot of people in this, who have seen that positive development where today women are not perceived as burden to their families. They're perceived as assets. And I really subscribe to that adage, you make one woman financially independent, you make the entire society financially independent. Are there problems? Yes, there are. No two ways about it. But come on, let's not look at it's not all gloom and doom. I think there's a lot of bright sunlight out there. And I think that's the positive way that we're going. Again, qualifying it, challenges are still there, but let those challenges not overwhelm the kind of things that we progressed over in the past decade. It's phenomenal.
You want to come back, Jayshree, on this?
Yes, I just want to add, I don't think we have a contrary view there, Aditya, at all. That's what I was saying, that it is such a huge enabler of rights for women and actually gives them access to livelihoods and everything else everywhere. In fact, even MG Narega, if you think about it, is actually larger numbers of women are actually signed on to the Narega. side, say in places like Rajasthan, in rural areas, more than men are actually have job cards under Narega. So no, we don't have a contrary view there. I'm saying when the internet is taken away, how much more harm it causes women. Because it is so important for women. It is so important for their access to livelihood, safety, security, and everything else. In fact, that's what I was saying. So no, we don't have a contrary view in terms of what it has done for women.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two sides of the coin. One is that it becomes, as you say, an enabler. You get financial independence through all sorts of possibilities through the internet. But if you don't have access to it, then that discrepancies kind of become more enlarged, and this is the problem. So which might did you want to say a few words, Hasan, on this, or?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yeah. So, to understand the Professor Aditya's and Jayshree's this point, so I understood that internet is the most powerful tool or medium. So, in sociology, we consider internet today as social institution. So, internet is not just a technology today; it is a very powerful social institution. So, if there is internet shutdown, everything get affected. Even the most empowered, digitally empowered society may get affected if internet is shut down for even one day. So that is the issue that internet is most powerful medium today.
Yeah. I think somebody famously said, I tweet, therefore I am. And that maybe gives credibility to what you just said. I did want to ask the three of you one last question, and this is that a number of studies have shown that these are country-based studies, comparative studies. These studies have shown that greater digital connectivity leads to a greater degree of happiness in the population. However, you kind of assess happiness. Do you think India is getting happier because of the Digital India drive? And maybe we'll start with Aditya.
Well, I think I think again, in this case, again, the digital connectivity acts as an enabler, right? It acts as a catalyst for a lot of emotions, which would have taken in normal analog world a lot of time to reach out to each other, and they would have probably petered out or faded out. Now, because of the instant connectivity of emotions, of instant connectivity of information, it creates a certain domino ripple effect, which is there. But what I can tell you today is, and again, this may be not only due to the digital part, there is this general belief in India as a country. You look at an average Indian today, she believes more in herself. You look at an average Indian today, he is happier with his lot as an Indian. Does that mean that they don't aspire for more? Of course, they aspire for more, and that's wonderful. But there's this general belief that yes, we are moving forward. And if I may borrow a phrase from my American friends, there's a sense of manifest destiny in India as a country today. That yes, perhaps in the next few decades, you will see an era of Pax Indica. Now there can still be a lot of hurdle, but that's the general manifestation. There's this belief, and that belief obviously manifests also into this general feel good aspect which is there. We are a country of 1.5 1.4 billion. There are all problems, and it's a vast country. That's a different story. But the overarching belief is of yes, our time is coming now, and we are going to be much better tomorrow than what we were yesterday. And I think that's a great belief and a great feeling to have.
Okay, thank you, Aditya. Hasan, your viewpoint on this?
I just here would like to add something. When we say particularly on the uh, digital inclusion aspect, like financial exclusion and digital inclusion aspect, as the various programs, of course, like as Professor Aditya has mentioned about the women's schemes and how uh, the banks are helping women to be digitally financially more included. So the again here I would add the point of digital literacy. Many times in the rural areas, what we have observed is that the rural women or even the rural men and women, they are not very digitally literate. They are not much aware about the digital aspects, and they approach third person, maybe a particular the center or shop or any particular kind of a person who knows, and they approach the third person, and that becomes a gap in the information access, gap in the usage, or gap in the proper utilization of the advantage. As there is in Assam, there is there are banks like Grameen Bank, which are mainly located in the rural parts of the Assam. So these Grameen banks provide microloans to the peoples, particularly the even self-help groups like SHG groups. But there are many third parties involved who manages, like who takes certain kind of certain share from the manager, from the persons involved, the beneficiary involved, and they are like using their digital knowledge, and those who are digitally illiterate are getting excluded, or they may be they may be getting vulnerable. So most such examples are there, maybe in the NREGA or other digital panchayats or digital governance issues, where digitally illiterate peoples are getting affected because of their digital illiteracy. These programs are no doubt very much effective, very much inclusive in policy, but in the real situations, their illiteracy is making a great concern. So this is my point.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think what you're really saying is that, it really does hinge on inclusivity. If you get happier through digitalization, you obviously have to be included within that domain of, sort of broader activity that societies move towards, and India is no exception. So, Jayshree, does Digital India make Indians happier?
Thank you. I'll try to bring it back to where we started. I think India has an incredible opportunity at this juncture, especially with the export of its digital public infrastructure, with using technology in the role of good governance. It has this opportunity where it can set a precedence in the world. It can become either it can show the world where you have technology and digital public infrastructure that is rights respecting. It can show a way where, getting on the internet or using technology to solve the problems does not come at the cost of people's rights, people's privacy, data. Or it can go the other way. So I am hoping that the kind of dialogues we are having gives me hope. The kind of like conversations we are having about issues like this. Nobody has all the answers. In this space, in the space of technology, especially, I feel that things move so fast that we are all playing catch up in many ways. But really, especially as sort of the space India has today, and the way it is perceived in the global south, and what it can as the leader in the global digital economy, it has an incredible opportunity to set the tone where, technology, where a digital India is a rights respecting one and shows the way to the world, where, the future of the internet doesn't have to come at the cost of people's rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jayshree. This is a fascinating point to end on. It could be up or down, and India holds the key to that. It turned out that at the recent Davos meeting, the World Economic Forum, Debjani Ghosh, and who is president of the National Association of Software and Service Companies, and she made a quite interesting comment. She said, as you said, but I think she may just be looking at the upside. She said the world will benefit by looking at India and what we are doing with technology. And I hope India makes the right choices in terms of what it does with technology so that the world can also benefit from that. So thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Jayshree. Thank you, Hasan. Thank you also the team at the South Asia Center, Nilojan and others. And of course, all of those who've logged in, different parts of the world, different timings. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thanks a lot, and goodbye from us. Bye-bye.